So welcome to Progenesis Academy webinar. Today, we have a very important topic to talk about, which is the impacts of the Roe versus Wade case, the Supreme Court decision, how that impacts fertility treatment and overall reproductive rights for patients. We have invited two excellent physicians, Dr. Serena Shen, a reproductive endocrinologist from the IRMS, and we have Dr. Gunner. She is the reproductive endocrinologist from USC/HRC Fertility. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank
Well,
you.
I heard both of you on social media talking a little bit about the Roe and Wade case. We have a lot of patients that are interested in knowing how these impact their daily fertility treatments. And I guess to start with, let's just put this in context and talk about the historical event of Roe and Wade for those patients who don't know what it is. Maybe Dr. Gunnar, you can talk about it.
Yes, I'm happy to. So just to provide a brief overview. Recently, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and this was in a decision that was labeled as Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which was a case concerning Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban and whether states can restrict the procedure even before a fetus is viable. So Justice Alito delivered the court's opinion and said Roe was egregiously wrong and argued that the case should be overturned because the right to an abortion is not expressly stated in the Constitution or deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition. And several other judges signed on to his opinion, and the three liberal judges dissented. So with this decision and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, there is no longer any federal protection for abortion. And this is now allowing individual states to push forward restrictions on abortion. And there are currently 13 states who have trigger laws, meaning that the laws with the reversal or overturning of Roe v. Wade are beginning to go into effect and will go into effect. And so maternal mortality due to a legal abortion is 0.41 per 100,000 procedures in comparison to overall maternal mortality of 23.8 per 100,000 live births. So it's a lot more deadly to be pregnant and deliver than it is to have a legal abortion. And there is sufficient data to demonstrate that restricting access to legal abortion does not reduce the number of procedures, but it does reduce the number of safe abortions. And this is going to worsen healthcare disparities that already exist, because patients who can afford to go to states like California, where I am based, where abortion will still remain legal, patients that can afford to do that will do so and have their procedures performed. And then patients that can't travel because of the cost of gas now, because of the distance that they need to drive, the cost of flying is so much more expensive, the cost of childcare, the fact that they don't have health coverage through their insurance and they don't have time off from work and are at risk of losing their job if they take the time off, those patients will be further entrenched in poverty. It will limit their ability to seek higher education, to seek higher paying jobs, and so it will worsen the disparities that already exist. And just to give a comparison, the states that are likely going to move forward with restricting abortion or already have, 33.6 million women reside in these states. And in comparison, states like California and others that likely won't restrict abortion, 30.7 million women reside in these states. So more than half the women in this country are at risk of losing their reproductive rights.
Thank you so much. And I will put the map in a little bit to put this more into geographical context. But I want to talk to you, Dr. Shen. So we're talking about abortion rights and how it was redefined by the Supreme Court. But can you help us put this in the context of IVF? How this could impact IVF?
So the context is that the strategy for making abortion illegal seems to lie mostly with this idea of personhood, which is a term that we give to laws that give the legal status of a person to a pregnancy or an embryo or a fetus prior to birth. So if an embryo or a fetus or a pregnancy has the status of a person, then you can say abortion is illegal because you're terminating that person's right. And this is where it becomes really great, because these laws are written to accomplish a certain political objective of not allowing people to have, say, abortions. And there's a lot of confusion about this term. So when the lay public says the word abortion, usually people mean elective termination of a viable, healthy pregnancy. And when a medical professional uses the word abortion, it's like ending any kind of pregnancy. And the vast majority of these procedures are actually procedures done on non-viable pregnancies, where somebody, just a pregnancy is abnormal, or the heartbeat is stopped, or the patient is bleeding, or they're infected, or the pregnancy is in the wrong place, like in the fallopian tube. All of those are considered abortions under medical care. And there's no real distinction in the law about those things. So that is the most common scenario where we're seeing real issues, because when somebody has a non-viable pregnancy or bleeding during pregnancy or an ectopic pregnancy, you need that procedure in order to keep the woman safe, or even to save her life. And that is called an abortion, but it's very different than what a lot of people mean by abortion. So it's just a medical procedure. So what we're seeing is that routine reproductive medical care for women is being outlawed. And the definition, using this definition of personhood, because IVF professionals work with embryos, and we make a lot of embryos, we help people make a lot of embryos because we try to help people build families and preserve their fertility. And we try to reduce their risk for miscarriages. We make a lot of embryos. The vast majority of those embryos are not capable of ever being a person, no matter what you do with them, because that is the normal inefficiency of Mother Nature. Just a lot of eggs and sperm are never going to be healthy enough to make a baby. A lot of embryos never going to be healthy enough to make a baby. So a big part of the success of in vitro fertilization is sorting through and finding the embryo that is capable of actually becoming a healthy baby. And that's not easy to do. It's like a needle in a haystack. So if we can't do that, we can't sort through embryos, we can't discard abnormal embryos, we can't freeze embryos, we can't biopsy embryos, because these embryos are considered legally persons, then we can't help people have families. And I know there's a lot of confusion about that, because even physicians don't really understand how these anti-abortion laws impact us. But we, the three of us, know IVF is already an issue in the United States. It works really, really well. It's really safe. It really helps infertile couples struggling to conceive to have a baby. And yet there's not enough access, because it's not covered for most people, and there's not enough centers and not enough doctors. And now, if certain aspects of IVF are going to be illegal in more than half the states, we have a real issue. And we don't know how these laws are going to impact people, because some of them are punishable with, like, are being treated as felonies. And just hearing about these stories in Missouri, where if you break the abortion law in Missouri, it's considered a felony and could be punishable by jail time. And apparently, I saw this in a couple of news articles. I don't know how true it is, but apparently doctors are being told by their hospital administrators, in order to keep you out of jail, don't do these life-saving procedures until it's clear that the person is at risk of death, okay? Which is exactly the opposite of how Dr. Gunner and I were trained. We don't wait until it looks like the patient might die. We want to take care of the patient before we get to that point, especially young reproductive age women who often look really good until like they're actually about to die. So this is exactly what we were taught not to do. We went through years of training, hours and hours of training to be able to help people and save their lives. And now there's a law saying it might be illegal for us to practice medicine the right way. It's not only about abortion, it's just about good medical care.
Yeah, exactly. The question is divided in two pieces. One is the reproductive rights, the right of women to choose however they want to carry their pregnancy or not carry their pregnancy. But in the IVF context, I personally have never seen a patient that comes spend their lifetime trying to get pregnant, pay for relatively expensive treatment, and then abort just for abortion. It doesn't exist. That concept doesn't exist.
No.
So why is
that doesn't exist at all? And yet, yes.
So why is it impacting IVF then, Dr. Gunner? If this type of situation don't typically occur in IVF?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want everyone to keep in mind, this is uncharted territory. So Roe v. Wade was enacted in 1973. The first IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born in 1978 in the UK. And the first IVF baby in the US was born in 1981. So as Dr. Chen was talking about, a lot of the language and the bills that are going to be introduced in the individual states involve when life is conceived, personhood, is an embryo human, and the fear is that that is going to trickle into infertility care for patients, but it's uncharted territory. So we have to wait and see how this plays out. And all of us being here and advocating is so important. There are historical evidence, there's historical evidence to show that when people came together in states like Louisiana and said, we don't agree with these bills, they were not passed. So, we do have power here in our individual states to advocate for what's in the best interest of patients. But going back to this question, so I want to point out the state of Louisiana. I don't know if anyone is from that state, but even before Roe v. Wade was overturned with Dobbs v. Jackson, Louisiana has historically had laws where embryos cannot be discarded, they cannot be destroyed. And so you bring up this point of, well, who pays for and maintains these embryos that patients do not want, that may have tested abnormal on genetic testing? Are other states going to pass similar laws where you cannot destroy these embryos? Does that mean now that IVF patients have to have more IVF cycles and stimulate less aggressively so they only get 1 or 2 embryos, so they don't have a surplus of embryos that have to be stored? And so do they have to spend more time and physically and emotionally go through more cycles of IVF because of this? Then there's this question of gestational carriers. Okay, that's another individual human being that's going to carry your embryo. And what if there is a situation in which an abortion is indicated, but your state does not allow it? So a lot of these unknowns are now being brought up, and we don't have any precedents or guidance in the world of infertility to direct us. So there's a lot of hypotheticals, but what I will say to reassure everyone is IVF is still legal. It is legal in all the states in the United States. There's currently no bill to outlaw or make fertility care in and of itself illegal, but Dr. Chen and I are OBGYNs, as we are fertility physicians. And, once our patients get pregnant, then these laws kick in at the time of fertilization in states like Texas, where once the egg is ovulated and fertilized by the sperm, that's when these laws kick in. And there are repercussions for people, healthcare professionals who aid these patients, and that's what's scary. So for instance, I'll use Texas as an example. In Texas, they have the heartbeat law that starts at time of conception. Third parties can bring civil suits against people who aid, abet, and perform abortions. As Dr. Chen was outlining, these may be medically indicated non-viable pregnancies, and defendants have to bear the legal costs while plaintiffs are indemnified against countersuits for bringing groundless action. And I can give you an example of one of my colleagues. I was recently in Houston last weekend, who, Friday, the Roe v. Wade was overturned. I saw her Saturday, and she had a patient who had a missed abortion, a fetal demise, and the patient needed Cytotec, and she had prescribed it, and the pharmacist did not want to fill the prescription. And that's because the pharmacist is scared of legal action. So it is already affecting patient care in some of these states. And so right now we're all
Dr. Gunner, in Texas, not only are they indemnified, but I heard also they're going to be paid $10,000 for reporting. Is that
wow.
true?
I have not read it. I have not read about that, but that is that's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah. And then some legal experts have wondered with these reporting laws, like what happens if a doctor in Texas, say, sends their patient out of state, maybe to New Jersey or California, and says, go get your medical procedure there because the heartbeat is stopped. You need to remove the pregnancy. This is not safe to leave it in here. And the doctor in New Jersey or California does the DNC. Could that doctor who sent the patient out be liable? Could the doctor who actually does the procedure out of state, could they be liable? Nobody knows the answers to these questions. Yeah.
Right now, patients have rights that protect them to travel to other states for services. But yes, when they return back to their home state, will they get prosecuted? That's a question we don't know. So these are individual states, and so the elected officials can present bills, and the likelihood of bills being passed or these types of bills being presented really depend on the political leanings of the elected officials in that state. So in California, the chances of a bill that limits abortion passing is nearly 0%. And then in 13 states, there's already trigger laws where bills are in the process of kicking in. And then in some states, so anyway, I think the majority, like I said, the majority of women reside in states in this country where there will be restrictions.
If a patient decide to travel for that medical necessity, and they may be subject to persecution or would be violating a certain law. And I know that the president has spoken about the state departments playing a role in protecting those patients from being persecuted or something.
Yeah. And a lot of states, individual states where abortion is safe now, like New Jersey, they have pledged to say they will pass extra legislation to try to provide extra protections because people are not certain how these laws will be impacted. There's also some concern that the goal in a couple of years would be to pass a federal national abortion ban. And a lot of the states right now, like New Jersey, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, that really want to protect all of these reproductive rights are, thinking about if there is a federal law, how can they protect people in their state from having full access to this kind of medical care?
I'm going to take some of the questions directly from patients and from attendees. So one question was, can you explain restrictions before viability? And probably they are talking about medical conditions during pregnancy, or maybe it's a pretty general question. But if you want to address it, and I will put another question for you, Dr. Shen, since you were talking about embryo there are conditions, genetic conditions that sometimes the patient and physician don't know about till they get a prenatal test, and then they will, or maybe there is an impact on the baby's health during that pregnancy, and then later on you find out there is a condition. Those are conditions that are very difficult to manage. How do you see, restrictions of the ban restrictions affecting those situations?
Those things are already happening now. We in New Jersey, we're already getting patients from these states who say, a lot of if somebody doesn't do pre-implantation genetic testing, then a lot of times we find out these abnormalities are in the second trimester, around 15 to 20 weeks, either with the genetic testing or with the very detailed fetal scan where they can see abnormalities. So if they find a fetus that has a lot of genetic or other developmental abnormalities that is not viable, the standard of care, good medical care, is to end the pregnancy rather than risking the mother's life of continuing the pregnancy for a non-viable fetus that may still, even though it's non-viable and will not produce a live birth, still has a heartbeat. But, if that was occurring in Texas, the limit was 6 weeks. Now it's going to go, I think it's going to trigger to fertilization. Maybe Dr. Gunner knows the answer because it's hard to keep all the states straight. But we, a lot of the high-risk OBs in New Jersey were getting referrals from states like Texas saying, I have this abnormal fetus. My doctor told me the medically appropriate thing to do is to end the pregnancy now rather than waiting because the pregnancy is non-viable, but that's not legal in Texas. So here I am in New Jersey to get this procedure. So we are already seeing this happen already. So it is already impacting medical care for a lot of patients across this country. And again, I think it's important to say that even though people are using this word abortion, most of the issues are actually not elective pregnancy termination of a viable pregnancy. Most of the impact in medical care is just normal, routine GYN women's health care that is being impacted. So that's really a concern. And then the IVF concerns are more theoretical because IVF has not specifically been outlawed anywhere. It's just the interpretation of these laws is really unclear. And we are wondering if this is going to really lower our ability to deliver good IVF care, lower our pregnancy rates, increase the miscarriage rates, increase multiple birth rates, all of which increases risk to both the mom and the baby.
So just to kind of address the questions that attendees were asking, so at this point, there is no such law or anything that regulates IVF.
There is no law that specifically outlaws IVF. However, if IVF is not specifically protected in the language of the law, it is possible, given the circumstances, that it could still be considered illegal. Just as Dr. Gunner said, private citizens, for example, in Texas, can decide, I think that was against the law. I don't have to pay any legal fees. I'm not going to be punished for bringing this case on. I think this doctor was wrong. I don't think they should have done this. Let me report them. I think they're getting $10,000 supposedly. And then, then the doctor is in court. We're very concerned. We have a lot of patients to take care of. There's not enough of us. There's so many patients who need our services, and people are suffering. And here we're in this position of thinking, well, we're not totally sure. Are we going to end up in jail? Are we going to end up in court? What is going to happen, because we're not specifically protected. So even though we're not specifically illegal, we are not specifically protected. And because the laws were written without consideration for medical care, very difficult to figure out what's going to happen.
Yeah, and there is another question that is very related to what you were saying, and they were asking if the restrictions of moving embryos from state to state are subject to, any limitation of this kind. And
could be, depending on the state. We don't really know.
Yeah,
I've been asking that question too, Nabil, of like as many legal experts as I can. And Dr. Gunner, have you heard anything? Because I haven't got any clear, definitive answers. Everybody says it depends.
So no, currently no. So currently you can transport your embryos, you can keep them in the state they're in. There's a question about having your embryos stored in Texas. There is basically a lobby group that's a part of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, which is our organization for fertility care. And they are, actively, I want to reassure you, they're actively working with the US government and making sure that they're doing what they can to protect the legal rights of fertility patients. And they are, actively with their lawyers looking into issues like this. So at this time, no, there's no restrictions. But as Dr. Chen mentioned, there are personhood bills that will get that will be put through to see if they pass, and then that will impact embryos. But at this time, no. And then there was a question about if you're pregnant, the heartbeat stops, the baby has demised, can the mother seek treatment? So at this time, the Texas bill, the heartbeat bill, is for abortions performed on fetuses with a heartbeat. So you can still perform a medically indicated abortion for a fetal demise. But like I said, it's a gray zone because, for instance, the pharmacist did not want to fill the Cytotec, even though it's legal to do so because they are scared of persecution. And with time, these things may evolve. Once you pass the heartbeat bill, then are they going to start going into this gray area of missed abortions where the heartbeat is no longer active? And then the other thing is sometimes, patients are actively miscarrying. So they're having what's termed an incomplete abortion where they've already started the miscarriage process, but there may still be a heartbeat, but they may be hemorrhaging, and the treatment is to perform a dilation curettage, which is an abortive procedure to save the mother's life. And so now we're entering a lot of these gray zone areas. It's not always so black and white. And, I want to give an example of a patient who, in Ireland, abortions are illegal. This person's name, she was a dentist. I think her name was Savita, and this was in 2012, and she was 17 weeks pregnant. She went to the hospital in Ireland and essentially had premature rupture of the membranes of the amniotic sac, which puts you at risk of infection. And she ended up and they wouldn't perform quote unquote an abortion because I guess the baby still had fetal activity, but it would not be viable. The pregnancy was not going to successfully result in a live birth. And she was too preterm. And basically she ended up dying of sepsis because they wouldn't perform the abortion because of the laws in that country. And so we are facing these types of issues now in these states. So again, it's very gray. And if you're a fertility patient in Texas, right now IVF and fertility treatment is not restricted, nor is the use of your embryos and storage. But if you get pregnant and have some complication, then you're at very high risk of not getting the care you may need.
We have another question from a patient. She has 50 eggs. Can we be forced to carry all these embryos? Do we donate the eggs and antecedent embryos? We're in a panic mode at this point, and we live in North Carolina. Dr. Serena?
So that is a difficult question, and right now we don't think that you will be forced to use all the embryos and to carry them. Donating is still an option, and testing embryos theoretically is still an option, but we honestly don't really know whether you will continue to be able to do that in North Carolina. I don't think North Carolina is a trigger state, but I do think it's one of the states that is looking at passing anti-abortion legislation, and a lot of the devil will be in the details. So we would want you to contact Resolve and ASRM and just see what they say about what is going on in the state with those laws. We are seeing that some patients are feeling like they would like to transfer their frozen embryos to other states where things can seem clearer, as opposed to states where people wonder, is there going to be legislation that restricts what I do with my embryos? But right now, you should be okay. I do think it's very, very reasonable to start doing research about this and reaching out to resolve.org, asrm.org, and finding out in your particular state what is the status. I also think that your legislators would like to hear from you, because I think a lot of our field is very specialized. And if you're not an IVF patient or an IVF doctor, if you don't work in this space, then you don't really understand all the potential implications. And we are seeing that talking to legislators, speaking out in public, and helping to educate people is making a difference. That legislators are saying, oh, we didn't realize that when we're trying to pass this law, it affects you over here. We didn't think they had anything to do with each other. And so I think, Nabil, all of these questions you're asking are things we have to talk about with our legislators. You are a constituent in North Carolina. Your legislators should care about you and your family and your concerns. So we really, we do feel like doing that, talking to your legislators does make a difference. We are seeing that it's making a difference.
And just to kind of clarify, this is not just about IVF, right? It's also about the rights to carry the pregnancy you want the way you want, right? It's reproductive rights.
Yeah, and good medical care. Exactly.
Good medical care. Yeah. Regarding the statements of ASRM, I think they haven't clarified anything yet. They just said that for now we don't have enough information, and there's no reason to panic yet because we don't have enough information. I think that's what the kind of statement they made, right, Dr. Gunnar?
Yes, I don't want any patients to panic. I'm seeing in the chat questions about, if our embryos are deemed as people, are they subject to laws of the state they're stored in? And so, yes, the embryos in the state that they're in, if they are deemed humans, which is really not in line with scientific thought process, because an embryo is not yet a life until it is implanted in a uterus and leads to a pregnancy. So an embryo frozen in a tank from a medical perspective is not yet life. But in a bill could be termed as a human being. And so yes, then the laws in that state for a human being apply to those embryos. And then there's another question of someone who lives in Florida, their embryos are stored in Texas. Should we transfer to another state? I mean, Florida and Texas are states where I would be concerned, but I want to reassure everyone right now, again, there are no laws yet. The only laws that pertain specifically to fertility care, again, are in Louisiana, and in Louisiana, patients are not allowed to discard embryos, but they are not forced to have pregnancies with embryos. They just have to store them indefinitely. And so then the question is, do you want to be responsible for storage fees for embryos that you may have wanted to discard? And will other states that have political leanings like Louisiana pass similar laws? And I think the answer is yes, that's a possibility. But all of this is currently speculation. So currently there aren't any restrictions, but if you feel like these things are coming down the pipeline as you follow the news in your state and the statements that your politicians are making, then you may decide that you want to transport your embryos to a state that is not restricting reproductive rights.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. I'm going to take another question from attendees. Do you suspect that in worst case scenario that IVF embryos are a person, would the embryos be subject to laws for the state they are stored in, or the laws of the state the client lives in? Do you imagine this type of situation, Dr. Shen?
That's very, very complicated. So you're saying the intended parents would be in a different state than where the embryos are?
It doesn't specify if this is
Yeah, I think the devil is in the details, Nabil. I think
Yeah.
that is an extremely complicated question, and
Yeah.
it depends on state laws, federal laws, how they interact, how the laws are written, and how they are implemented. So that's why nobody really has the answers, and a lot of these laws are interfering with routine medical protocols and standards of care, so that is causing further confusion. And then this idea that there might be a federal ban. What if there is a federal ban on abortion, but say New Jersey and California pass extra legislation to say our patients our citizens are protected, or we're a haven for people from other states? What happens then? It's really not clear. Then we're kind of almost becoming like separate countries. It's very concerning, and I think while IVF is not illegal now, the fact that medical care is already being impacted, and our patients who already have to deal with enormous stress of infertility have to even think about these things and worry about these things is really a shame. So it's upsetting that this is happening.
Can you expand in Medicare how the impact was on Medicare? You mentioned Medicare that has been impacted. Could you expand on that?
Medical care.
Oh,
routine medical care.
Okay.
Yeah, routine medical care is being impacted right now. That doctors are worried about normal things that they would do to help their patients stay safe.
Yeah.
They're thinking, is this legal or not?
Yeah.
And doctors should only have to think about, is my patient safe? Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
I want to jump in on this question, just talk a little bit about the history of personhood bills. A lot of them involved, I mean, starting in the 1980s, really with Reagan, a lot of them involved mothers using drugs while pregnant and then being persecuted because of the effect on the fetus. But I want to give a really encouraging example. So in 2012 in Mississippi, there were people who tried to pass an initiative that would amend the state constitution to grant full legal rights to fertilized eggs, okay? And so doctors and abortion rights groups mounted a campaign and said that this would affect birth control, IVF, and ability for a doctor to care for pregnant women, and voters rejected the initiative by a wide margin. So I just want to let all of you know on this call that you all have a lot of power to prevent this from happening. And this was in the state of Mississippi. So these people
a very conservative
control. Yeah, we don't have to be scared. Yeah. They don't have all the power. Like, we can advocate for ourselves and actually make sure these types of things don't occur. So
you can use your voice. Yeah. You can use your voice. You can vote. I do think a lot of Americans, we think, well, healthcare and human rights and women's rights, we take it for granted, and it's not a voting issue. But with this particular issue, it is that because these laws are in place now, and doctors are worried that just taking care of a patient who's bleeding might land them in jail, obviously is compromising medical care. And we need to speak up about that. And our legislators are not medical experts, and maybe they're not patients, and we need to explain to them how this is impacting them and what we want from them, because you're their constituents. So definitely speaking up and raising awareness and education and explaining and saying, we do not want this law, it's harmful, please get rid of it, or voting for somebody who will get rid of it really can make a difference.
Yeah, and so this is the Roe versus Wade is something that existed for 50 years. You guys, as a reproductive endocrinologist, have you ever thought that it's going to be this that has this impact on directly on IVF?
No, we did not imagine this, but this is why, unfortunately, I do think doctors and patients have to become politically active, because we do have to speak up. We can't just stand by and let these kinds of things happen, because people are being impacted, and it's an issue.
Dr. Garner, what is your advice to people who are currently seeking IVF treatment or trying to conceive? What advice do you have for them?
So, it's so hard. So in any state that you reside in the US, you can proceed with IVF care. But the question becomes, when you get pregnant, what happens? And in my opinion, it is not safe for patients who live in these trigger states and in other states that are likely going to pass bills restricting abortion. It is no longer safe as a reproductive aged woman who is pregnant to reside in these states. Your surrogates, your gestational carriers, if you have any complication in pregnancy, you are at higher risk of mortality and morbidity. And that is unfortunately the truth of the situation. And so advocacy is really important. So I think the first part of helping patients get pregnant currently is not impacted, but I think the latter part of after you get pregnant, literally at 6 weeks, now some of these states have laws that are restricting your access to the care you need. So I really don't know what to say with regard to that. I think it's a scary time. And I think it goes back to people like Savita, who died from a situation that was unnecessary, and that can happen now, unfortunately. And so, I'm in California. I'm happy to provide care to anyone that comes to California. But I think, again, this is a disparity issue where there are patients that just can't do that. And it's just so unfortunate.
Yeah, and so when we think about a situation where patients are concerned about conceiving in certain states, there are a whole, group of physicians that are practicing there that have sacrificed their entire life to provide care for patients. Do you feel like this could impact families of doctors and practitioners in other states?
I think so, Nabil. We are seeing that, like a lot of our young fellows that are just, deciding where to practice medicine, where to practice fertility care. A lot of them are saying they probably would prefer not to practice in states that have a lot of restrictions. So even though IVF is legal and we can practice in these states, a lot of our people that have to make decisions about where they're going to practice are worried about going to these states. And those states are also states where there's not enough IVF care. I mean, most of the country really doesn't have enough IVF care. Most people that need IVF actually don't have access to that care in this country. That's been going on for a long time. And we've been fighting that, and to add this complexity to it is really disheartening, because it is going to make access to fertility care much worse. And it's already not very good.
Yeah, I mean, if they're trying to discourage healthcare providers from providing care. So in Texas, if you can get you can get sued for providing abortion care, and you have to pay for your own legal fees, and then you can't countersue. I mean, these types of things are means to discourage providing care. So the only approach really is to try to repeal these bills to do what we can from an advocacy perspective. And again, I want to reassure everyone, ASRM is working on this and on a national level. And, Dr. Chen and myself, there's lots of people like us who support our patients, want the best care for our patients, not just in the states that we reside, but in all states. And so, one of my fellows is currently at USC training and will be moving back to Texas. And we need people like her who are going to do the right thing for their patients in these states.
So we talked about all these limitations. So imagine if the restrictions are being implemented in certain states. Give us a typical scenario of an IVF treatment where things can get complicated. Dr. Shen.
So, for example, let's say somebody has a history of recurrent miscarriage. And we know that most of the time, PGTA, pre-implantation genetic testing with aneuploidy to check the number of chromosomes in the embryo can dramatically lower the risk of miscarriage from, some of these patients have well over 50% chance of miscarriage. The normal rate of miscarriage is 25%. PGT can lower it to less than 10%. And that makes a huge difference for the patient. And that means we make a lot of embryos. We test all the embryos, and the ones that are abnormal are discarded. And we only put in one embryo at a time that is genetically tested. So depending upon what you're allowed to do, like if an embryo truly has personhood status, are you allowed to biopsy that embryo? Are you allowed to freeze the embryo? Are you allowed to discard the embryo? It doesn't seem like you will be able to. If you look at the Oklahoma law, for example, it starts at fertilization, but the Oklahoma law specifically says it's illegal to interrupt a pregnancy starting at fertilization in the mother's womb or in the woman's womb. So that does not apply to in vitro fertilization. And right now those doctors are doing IVF, and they're feeling like that specifically does not apply to in vitro fertilization, although the lawyers in the Oklahoma medical centers are saying, let's definitely write some language so in your consents and things like that, so people understand these are the things we do and this is how we are practicing within the law. But let's say a similar law, personhood starts at the point of fertilization, but they don't specify in the uterus or outside the uterus. They don't specify IVF, but if you don't say fertilized embryo in the uterus, it is illegal. Then what if you discard an abnormal embryo? It doesn't say it's okay to discard an abnormal embryo. These laws don't really say things like that. They just say this embryo, fetus, pregnancy has personhood status. So you can see how the way the law is written doesn't necessarily answer any of these medical questions. So if they don't specify that the embryo is in the uterus and you destroy an abnormal embryo that is in vitro embryo, could that be considered illegal under that state law? It's not clear.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have about a few minutes more. Maybe we could, I know that I have introduced you guys at the beginning, but we have not talked about your practice. Maybe Dr. Gunnar, you can start talking about your practice in California and what you do for patients.
Yes, so I'm an assistant professor at University of Southern California, USC, and I work at USC HRC Fertility, which is a fertility clinic in Pasadena, and I provide patients, fertility care both there and both at the LA County Hospital downtown. And provide the full breadth of fertility care and surgical care that's needed.
Thank you so much. We have had 400 subscribers for this webinar. That's how important it was. Right now, we have about 103 patients on these chats listening to you guys. And so I appreciate the amount of information you've provided. I know it's still uncertain and there more news will come up eventually. And maybe we can have another webinar clarifying what's the, the updates and all that. And I will let you, Dr. Shen, introduce your practice for us.
Well, I'm the Director of Reproductive Medicine at the Institute for Reproductive Medicine and Science, and also at the Cooperman Barnabas Medical Center. I'm in Livingston, New Jersey, and Hoboken, New Jersey. Our practice has 11 doctors, 7 offices in New York and New Jersey. And we do, fertility preservation, LGBTQIA care, fertility, infertility, surgery, the whole spectrum of reproductive medicine. I am trying to advocate along with Dr. Gunner on a state and the national level to make sure that access to care is maintained and hopefully improved. So I hope, people will follow me at Dr. Serena H. Chen on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and our practice, IVF_IRMS, on all those platforms. We do an Instagram Live every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, come and join us. We're going to be talking about Roe v. Wade and IVF and fertility preservation, all those things. We do that every Tuesday at 4:30. So, but definitely please reach out to me on social media to discuss this and ask me questions. And a lot of people have been reaching out saying, how can I help? I don't know if you guys have been following, but SB 956 in Pennsylvania is a personhood bill that's up for a vote maybe in the next couple of weeks. It's not clear whether it will be. And I posted about it and asked people to call their senators in Pennsylvania or to call their friends who live in Pennsylvania and get them to call their senators. And a lot of people responded, with posts and calling. And I have to say, I really appreciate that. And Dr. Gunner and I, that's exactly what we want, is we will be letting you know about these issues that are coming up, not just in our states, but across the country, because we're actually in states that are pretty safe. And we appreciate you following us and following Progenesis so that we can all magnify each other's voices and speak out for what we think is right. So, Nabil, we really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Dr. Gunner, any final statements?
I echo Dr. Chen's statements, and in the chat, I tried to answer as many of the questions that I could that we haven't discussed yet. I put my email in there if you need to contact me. I also put in the address for ASRM, so that's the best resource to get updates on progress on Roe v. Wade and how it may overturning of Roe v. Wade and how it may impact fertility care and what ASRM is doing to help combat impact on fertility care. So, please feel free to reach out if you need to.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah. And I just want to add resolve.org also. Dr. Gunner put in asrm.org. Definitely follow them and check them out. Resolve.org also has resources. Please check them out as well. And then that's my handle for Instagram and Twitter. So please reach out to me there.
Very good. Well, we have extended an invitation to Barbara Clora from Resolve to participate. I hope next time we can have her come and talk to us about what she's doing as far as advocacy. Dr. Gunner and Dr. Shen, thank you so much for your participation and for your perspective. And I will see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.